So our keynote speaker, Ms. Jamie Tyrone, will address the topic of courage of knowing. And I've had the pleasure of personally knowing Jamie and her husband for over 20 years. We served on a board together and recently had the opportunity to reconnect, and I've learned more about her story. I knew we would all want to hear Jamie's journey of courage. So please join us as Jamie shares with us her remarkable journey of overcoming fears and challenges and in the healthcare industry and her uplifting message of empowerment. Jamie, over to you. You're on mute, Jamie. You're on mute.
There we go. So thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. Gosh, it's been nice to reconnect and see where our lives have taken us over 20 years. I have a story today that I'm going to start from the beginning. In 2009, I decided to participate in a study that was, if you knew you are at certain risk for genetic risk for certain diseases, would you change your lifestyle? And I had a history of neurological issues that we hadn't been able to pinpoint, and I was looking at my genetic risk for MS. And because there was kind of a piece to the puzzle to put together, and so I couldn't wait to jump at this opportunity. Now, I give you a little bit of history of my family. My great-grandmother, grandmother, 2 great uncles, and my father all died with Alzheimer's disease. And having been a nurse, having been in business development, genetics wasn't even on my radar screen. And I wanted to find out my risk for MS. And so one night I'm sitting by the computer by myself. It was all done through the direct-to-consumer market. Like if you would go to 23andMe and you give your spit swab, and they come back and they say, okay, your results are in. There was no genetic counseling, no information, no one pointing out that I could possibly have this high risk for Alzheimer's disease. So I open up my computer, and sure enough, there was the information, and I couldn't wait to open it up. And it came back that I have a 91% lifetime risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. Totally unprepared. My father was currently in the throes of Alzheimer's disease, and I didn't know where to go, where to turn. So I went to the primary investigator of the study, who shall remain nameless, because I wrote a book. There was a picture of it, how my journey's come along. And I went to him and I said, this is really anxiety provoking to me. And he said, you should be happy to know this information, because now you can change your lifestyle to prevent Alzheimer's disease. Well, there is no prevention or cure. We are learning that by doing some of these things, we can slow progression or slow onset. But in the meantime, I was very depressed. I think that night I had a whole bottle of my husband's Chardonnay, and he was wondering where the heck it went. And I said, well, let me tell you, I have a story to tell you, sweetheart, sit down. So I was plagued with a lot of anxiety, and he said to me, what is your biggest fear? And I said, my biggest fear is that you're going to have to take care of me. Now, mind you, he's 13 years older than myself. And he said, sweetheart, don't worry about that. He said, I'll be dead by then. And we were laughing hysterically, because that's the humor that we have in our household. And I'm like, well, I guess I won't have to worry about that. And the next day he went out and increased his life insurance. So he's a sweet man. Jock knows him. He's hilarious and fun to be with. And so anyway, he's in his flannel pajamas right now, so he's not going to be making an appearance. So I decided that I needed to get some more information. What I found out in my discovery was that this study, which was funded by the NIA and the NIH, did not follow the guidelines for genetic counseling, genetic testing. I was supposed to have counseling before, during, and after the whole process and the procedure. So here I am now with all this information. It's out of the track, and you have to go, do I want to know this information? I decided that I would be a research participant at Banner Alzheimer's Institute in Arizona. So I would go every year for lumbar punctures, CAT scans, MRIs, the whole bit. But I still got very, very depressed. And to the point where I felt like I wanted to kill myself. And that's kind of embarrassing to say, but it's the truth. And that I didn't want anybody to have to go through what I went through. And that my inner voice was saying, why me? Why me? And then I realized, why not me? God gave me this life and this purpose from the very beginning of my career, my growing up, my whole being to be ready for this moment. I had to make a decision, and my husband said, "You know what, sweetheart, you're driving me crazy." He said, you need to get into therapy. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I really am driving you crazy. So I got into therapy. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I didn't realize that you could have a traumatic event in your life other than military related, but that you can have triggers. And I was just triggered. But through therapy and treatment, and I have to tell you, by the way, I want to talk about costs a little bit. Someone had asked me about costs. There's also a huge risk for cardiovascular disease with my genetic status. And by the way, only 2% of the world's population has this genetic status. So talk about isolation and feeling alone, and where do I go with this information? So between the cardiac workup that I went through, between the therapy that I went through, not only through the psychologist, but through a psychiatrist, at this point in time, it's probably over $50,000 that was spent on my care and trying to handle this information. So I happened to be doing a talk, one of the very first talks that I've ever had given, and I was approached by a neurologist who was a researcher, and he said, "I want to write a book with you." He said, "Your voice needs to be heard." And I'm like, I'm a science and math girl. I like almost failed English, and I'm going to be authoring a book. But just remember, you can pay people to do things that you may not be as good at. So anyway, so we partnered up, and I originally wanted the title to be Courage and Knowing. And people kept telling me, "Jamie, you're courageous, you're courageous." And I didn't see myself as being courageous. I saw myself as, I was really upset with what happened to me, and with my nursing background and being protective and in trying to help others, that I needed to make a difference. And when I took that moment where I had that road in my life, am I going to take the dark road and kill myself? Now, my beliefs said I'm living hell here, but I'd be living hell for eternity. And I was able to tap into that spiritual self and say, no, I have to take the bright road. I was told that I should sue the researcher, that he didn't follow guidelines. And I'm like, I can't see the rest of my life being negative. I can't do this. And so hence came the book. It was picked up by HarperCollins in 2019. It was published in 2019. There's so much that's happened to me along this journey. One of the things that Liz had asked me is, besides going into research, I decided to start a nonprofit 501c3 organization called, well, I'll tell you, I didn't know what I wanted to call it, but I knew there were a bunch of women in my life that were just phenomenal. And so I had a minivan, no children, a dog. Now I had a minivan. So when we do girls' night out, we went into the B.A.B.E. I was the designated driver in the B.A.B.E. So as I'm sitting there saying a few prayers and go, oh my God, what next? What do you have planned for me? All of a sudden it came to me, B.A.B.E.S, beating Alzheimer's by embracing science. And we are a group of women who collect our energies to, we've done a lot of fundraising in the past. We've had some pretty huge events here in San Diego in the beginning of a play with readers. Helen Reddy came and she read for us. And because, you know, we are women, we are strong. So she was my motto. And now, since then, my journey has moved on. That was my start, was with B.A.B.E.S. But my advocacy has led to being a founding member of Women Against Alzheimer's, and I'm being honored. Yeah, Maria Shriver's Wall of Empowerment. And you know, sometimes I look back at what I've done and I don't feel courageous, even though that's how people see me. I'm going to share with you as the most courageous thing I've done. And you probably will not ever realize this. Growing up, my father, it was a pretty abusive childhood. And my father got Alzheimer's disease. And the most courageous thing that I did in my life was to realize that I could love my father and take care of him during his journey. And you wouldn't think that took courage, but it really did. It took forgiveness. It took faith. It took listening to your instincts. And if I have to say that that's probably the biggest, most courageous thing that I've ever done, is to love my father and to take care of him through his journey. So I think, how are we doing on time, Jacques?
Yeah, we're doing great on time. You got plenty of time.
Okay. So I keep saying that I keep hearing that there should be another book on the horizon. And I don't think I would ever publish another book. But so many things have happened since my journey. After 12 years of trying to get people to listen about genetic testing, the need for genetic counseling, research participation, how important it is to help find a cure, I felt like my voice is now finally being heard. That kind of, I've been a trailblazer in the sense that sometimes I've had to get kind of surly and snarky and like, what? And, but now I sit on an AGREED, it's called AGREED, and I always have to write this down. It's Advisory Group for Risk Dementia and Education for Dementia. And it was originally convened by the NIA and the NIH. And through them, I have reached hundreds of researchers and helping them design research, clinical trials or studies in which before we were considered just a lab rat. You know, I shouldn't say just lab rat, but we were just a research participant. We're not research participants. We are people with needs, and without us lab rats, research could not be successful. So by sharing my story, sharing my experience of a horrible research experience to one where I had flourished in a research study for 12 years, I'm able to see both sides of it. And the patient's voice is being heard now, that when we join clinical trials, that, you know, we're going to be looking for certain things. Do we want to know what our genetic status is? Do we want to know if we have beta amyloid in our brain? Do we want to know if we have tau protein? I know these are all, but this is the sequelae of how Alzheimer's progresses. So we're in a very interesting world right now. We've had some big setbacks. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Aduhelm and it being reimbursed by CMS, and how it was very, very, very controversial. What I have to say to that is one of the things I talk about is trust, transparency, and ethics. And you get one shot at trust. If you break that chain of trust, a research participant, in any business person, it's going to be harder to regain it. So I'm being bold and provocative in the sense that in my personal opinion, what happened with this drug being approved when it didn't meet its phase 3 aim, and we used a surrogate biomarker to approve it, that I'm discouraged and I'm afraid because 3 of the pharmaceutical companies have come into the play to release a drug that is supposed to reduce beta amyloid, but this data did not show that it affected the trajectory of the disease. So it's been a hit. I'm hoping that I have hope, and I do have courage and inspiration because I will continue to be a lab rat. I will continue to contribute to research, and we are going to move forward. And we have a lot of things to look forward to.
Oh, definitely. And Jamie, thank you for sharing your inspiring story and having trust with us to come on and talk to us about this. I think it was it's been incredible, and the impact you've actually had on the disease as well as on research and how research is conducted, I think has been very impressive. I found your book both very intriguing and inspiring, and I would suggest that everybody should read this book. It's phenomenal. So, AJ, I think we may have some things in the chat.
We do. We've got a little bit of feedback going on. Let's see if we can take care of the feedback. Are we good? Okay, great. And I just want to add what courage you have to be able to actually present to us. So thank you, Jamie. So there are.
You guys made it very easy. And when I was asked to do this, I jumped at the chance because I trust Jacques. And I know Jacques would not be working with a group of people that you guys don't have the cohesiveness and collaboration to work together. So
yep.
That's
so true. So true. So we do have a few questions. So the first question, Jamie, is in the book, we refer to the government spending about $200 billion, that's with a B, $billion on healthcare with only 1% on research. Has that changed, and what's it going to take to change that?
Well, that's a great question, because I wanted to, as we had some downtime in between the first time we spoke and now, I went and pulled up those statistics. And it's now, according to the 2021 Alzheimer's Facts and Figures Report, right now in 2021, we've spent $355 billion.
Oof.
Wow.
For care for people with Alzheimer's disease. Now, we just released yesterday, Congress just agreed to spend another $289 million to fund investment in Alzheimer's public health infrastructure. Now, these are all starts, but when you look at the billions of dollars we're spending versus the millions of dollars of investment, the ratio is still way off. And how we can help, I know from my perspective, I love putting on a pair of comfortable shoes and going up to the hill.
Well, that's quite an experience in itself, as you know.
Well, my middle name is fun because it can be fun. I love it when I'm talking to a staff member or actually even our congressman women, and they actually start like engaging in a conversation. And to me, that's like, that is fun. Keep your eye on the ball. You know why you're here, but we all have power in our voice. And I did not realize that. I don't know if, 20 years ago, I was kind of a little meek person. Today, I'm like a tiger, but a friendly tiger.
Yeah.
So,
thank you for your activism in that regard, because so few people actually walk up those steps to Congress.
I literally cried when I was walking up those steps.
Wow.
It was so emotion provoking in a positive way. And we were going to, it was with the Women Against Alzheimer's group, Women Against Alzheimer's through USA 2. And so great organization. All I did is have to show up dressed, comfortable shoes. They had all the appointments made for me and for all of us. And we just spread out, and it was truly a memorable experience. I've been several times.
That's great. Now, the second question is rather poignant. So with with the introduction of the direct-to-consumer genetic testing, right? First of all, are there, markers for things like Alzheimer's, and then have they improved in terms of how they interact with the consumers when the genetic information gets published to the individuals?
This is where I get a little snarky.
Yeah.
They could learn to improve some of their disclosure methods. They do test for the gene. It's a risk gene. Now, there's a difference between a risk gene, which I have, versus autosomal dominant gene that if you have, you will get it. So there's a kindred in Colombia that have this mutation. And if they have a 50% chance of it being passed down from their parents. And if they have the mutation, they will get the disease. And there's huge research going on. CNN had covered it, and it was so much fun to be part of that. But for what they're testing for the direct to consumer, they're testing for a risk gene. And that risk gene is the ApoE gene. And it comes in 3 different flavors, 2, 3, and 4. So you inherit 1 flavor from each parent. So I just happen to be the lucky owner of 2 copies of the 4 variant, which is the worst variant to have, which puts me at this high genetic risk. So that's pretty scary information. Now, when you go to 23andMe, it used to be where they return the results and they would tell you if you had that variant. Now it's basically, oh, we see that you have this higher risk, or you have a marker that shows that you're higher risk. But what happens, when we find out information about ourselves, especially medical information, what do? We Google Dr. Google. And so my initial results showed I had a 75%. Dr. Google from Duke University, who discovered this gene, said, no, it's 91%. So here, statistics change, numbers change, all in how you add them up can make change. But I truly believe, and if anybody has a friend in the FDA, I'd love to meet him, because this information, people don't have any context to it.
Right.
They just know that they have this increased risk. So what does this really mean? There are people called the elderly who are in their 90s who have a boatload of amyloid plaque and never get Alzheimer's disease. But yet we don't hear about that. So I'm hoping I'm that 9%. And there are things that I can do to make sure I get to be that 9%. And that is, socialization is shown to be so important in brain health. And there was a study that was done in an assisted living facility, and they divided the participants into two groups. One group that felt like they had a purpose in life, and one that didn't feel like they had a purpose in life. And those who had a purpose in life, they scored higher, significantly higher in cognitive health and cognitive reserve. So do I get asked, pardon me?
The purpose is critically important.
Yes. So people ask me, are you glad you know this information? And I say 2 things can be true at the same time. No, I wish I'd not have found it out at all. But it changed my life, and now I have a purpose.
Yeah.
So
it sounds like there's still some additional regulatory oversight that we really need to put on these direct-to-consumer genetics companies, because they're really not providing that type of counseling that they should.
No, and I have the solution. There's a professor in Virginia Tech who has come up with an interactive online tool, and I've shown it to Harvard. I've shown it to NIH. They love the tool, and it's simple. It's open sourced. And so I think from a regulatory perspective, if someone wants to know their genetic status for Alzheimer's disease, that they should have to go through this interactive tool and answer the questions at the end.
Wow, cool. We actually have a lot of questions here. Let's see if we can, and we're going to go over time, so please stay patient with us. This is fascinating, and thank you, Jamie. So there's another question here. So your organization, Beating Alzheimer's by Embracing Science, I think there's also something about your bling bracelets. Is that still ongoing, or have you kind of moved on to something new?
I mean, my bling brace, so my B.A.B.E mobile and my bling bracelets were the hallmark of our organization. And I had these custom-made bracelets made out of coral. I had thousands of them. That was our color. And I would fling the bling. I would go speak at a conference and I would fling the bling. And one of our congresswoman, she was sitting in a room and I'm sitting next to her, and she goes, "You don't have to fling it. You could just put it on my wrist." So we've had a lot of fun with that. We have evolved as an organization. We are no longer a 501c3. COVID kind of put a little damper on all our fundraising, that what everybody knows. So we've adjusted, and the book happened to be where that was the next step in my life, and advocacy for what I'm doing with Harvard and with MIA. And so that's where it's all about. My calling card is no longer my B.A.B.E mobile, but it's my book. So, but I know there's been a request to resurrect that. So I don't know. We'll see what the future will hold.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie. I think there's a few other questions and actually just commentary that's, I think, very supportive of your position on things. Do you have any statistics on how many individuals are getting to genetic testing now in terms of direct to consumer, and kind of what percentage of the population really has elected to get that genetic information beyond just kind of their ancestry?
Now that's an unfair question. You should have prepped me with that, so I could have answered that. No, I don't know, but I can get the information for you. But I can't tell you how many phone calls I get and correspondence I get from people who have had the testing. They've been surprised with the results, and where do they go to next? So, I kind of see myself as a navigator for, in fact, oh gosh, there's a program that I started. I'm no longer involved in it because they're now doing a, what's the word I'm looking for? A pilot study in New York called Memory and Advocate Peers. So it's to help those who have Alzheimer's disease or caregivers to help navigate those who are newly diagnosed through the system. How do you get a hold of research? What resources are available to you? So that's another thing I have to put in book 2, I guess.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie. And everybody should buy your book, and then also look out for your next book coming out.
Absolutely.
And let's wrap this up, Sean.
Yeah, definitely.